The Overland, the daylight passenger train between Adelaide and Melbourne, is one of those services that still exists, not because it's the fastest, or the most luxurious, or even the most convenient, but because history, governance, and a series of compromises have kept it alive. I genuinely like the idea of this train. I've travelled by rail extensively overseas, and I want this to work. Today, the Overland is operated by Journey Beyond, the same company behind Australia's flagship rail cruises, the Indian Pacific, the Ghan, and the Great Southern. But unlike those trains, the Overland isn't really a cruise. It's trying to be two things at once, a practical A to B intercity service, and a kind of luxury little brother to Journey Beyond's premium offerings. That tension runs through almost every part of the experience. When South Australia's railways were transferred to the Commonwealth in 1975 and later folded into Australian National, passenger rail was still seen as a public good. Routes people had relied on for decades. The Overland sits squarely in that space. Even when the long-distance services were privatised in the 1990s, there appears to be an expectation, formal or informal, that certain routes would continue to exist at a minimum level. Today it survives through joint subsidies from the Victorian and South Australian governments, along with fare structures that intersect awkwardly with V-line pricing, particularly between Melbourne, Ararat and Western Victoria. It is telling that most of the actual passenger movement happens within Victoria. Departure from Melbourne is from Platform 2 at Southern Cross Station, with the overnight New South Wales train XPT rolling into Platform 1 for its 8:30am departure. It looks convenient, but in practice, a cross-platform transfer isn't really viable. And as anyone who knows, passenger rail isn't exactly a priority on a national freight network. Still, it's a pleasant way to start. Journey Beyond staff were present with clipboards, checking passengers off onto the left, but staff were friendly, professional, and very much in the Journey Beyond house style. And there's something quietly refreshing about this part. You just board the train. I was even able to wander up and down the platform to see the iron horse that would take us to Adelaide. On board, the experience is fairly straightforward, and I don't mean that as a criticism. This time around, the buffer car is serviceable, comparable to other long-distance rail services, comparable to airline buy-on-board food, comparable to the servo. I wasn't travelling in the higher class, with included meals, so expectations were realistic. What the train does well is the journey and the experience of a journey. Despite taking roughly 4 to 5 times longer than flying, there's something deeply pleasant about watching the countryside roll past. I've driven between Adelaide and Melbourne countless times. The train gives you a different perspective. You can stand up, stretch your legs, walk to the buffet, and that counts for something. Most passengers boarded and alighted at Ararat, and further west around Dimboola and Horsham. Including Neil, these towns are beyond the normal V-line train travel range. That in itself suggests something important. There is clearly some use of the V-line fare structure, with passengers treating the Overland as a regional Victorian service rather than a cross-country one. It is quicker to take the V-line train to Ararat and transfer, but the Melbourne departure times are close enough that the advantage almost disappears. Ararat station is alright. It's staffed, it is functional, it is close to town, and is the things you need. Beyond that though, the stations are feeling neglected. They're trying to hark back to a bygone era, but without the investment to make that nostalgia feel intentional. On the South Australian side, Murray Bridge in particular was rather depressing. After crossing the river, the station feels embarrassing. But when I took the journey, most of the time I was seated on the right-hand side of the train, which meant for many stations I was on the non-platform side. I'm sure there's some symbolism in there somewhere. When you look at the numbers, the comparison isn't flattering. Driving between Melbourne and Adelaide takes around 8 hours, depending if you stop or not. Flying is roughly an hour and a half in the air, plus all the things you have to do at the airport. The Overland takes just over 10 hours, and that includes a detour via Geelong, adding an extra 50 or so kilometres compared to the road route. But here's the thing. You don't have to deal with Tullamarine, there's no boarding scramble, no seatbelt sign. Yeah, there's some safety voiceovers, but that's okay. It is a different experience because it's a different mode, but it feels different. On the Adelaide end, arrival is at Adelaide Parklands Terminal, and this is where some cracks start to really show. The terminal itself is functional, but is deeply disconnected. There is no meaningful public transport integration, no safe, obvious walking route to either Richmond Road or Sir Donald Bradman Drive. Most passengers leave quickly, picked up by family, taxis or Ubers. Announcements are made on board reminding passengers to organise that in advance. You do need to organise your onward transport before you get into Adelaide. Having myself worked in passenger information roles, I've never recommended using public transport from Adelaide Parkland's terminal. And it's a bit of a missed opportunity. Even a simple diesel shuttle service into Adelaide Station, timed post-arrival, could transform the experience. Or, at a bare minimum, somehow work out an arrangement for a diverted airport bus service to swing by. Sure, it'll add 15 minutes to the bus run, but it is doable. Yes, standardisation complicates things a little bit. But as an interim measure, it all could be workable. As of late 2025, early 2026, in the lead up to the 2026 South Australian state election, rail to Mount Barker is back on the agenda. And to be fair, a 15-minute bus frequency is good, but buses always carry a sense of a temporary compromise. Rail feels permanent. You can see where the service goes. A guided busway can only do so much. Rail signals intent. And the Overland sits awkwardly between those worlds. Not quite a serious transport solution, not quite a heritage experience, not quite a luxury rail cruise either. I'm not the only one to make some similar observations. Other creators have made similar observations. Noel Phillips' critique wasn't surprising, given his extensive experience with long-distance travel worldwide. Tate said approached it differently, more generously, more attuned to the governance and funding constraints. Both perspectives are valid. What is telling is that the criticisms tend to converge on the same points: unclear purpose, under-realised potential, and a service that feels obligated. For Overland feels like a train Journey Beyond has to run, because of subsidies, clauses, expectations, rather than one it's truly allowed to reimagine. And that's a bit of a shame. For expanded service, the rolling stock exists, the locomotives exist, the demand, at least regionally, clearly exists. I don't hate the service, I actually quite like it. I just wish it was allowed to be better. Better connected, better times, better frequency. Thanks for coming along for the ride, and I'll see you next time.